Alright, I've got quite a story to share, and it involves me and my wife, Jennifer. We've been together for 9 years, the classic high school sweethearts. Our love story began in high school, at one of those cheesy school dances, the kind everyone's expected to attend. People always saw us as the perfect couple, but we had different dreams for our futures. I aimed to dive into my studies, pursue a career in law, and become an attorney, while Jennifer dreamed of making it big in Hollywood as an actress. I supported her ambitions, but I couldn't help but feel a little anxious about how we'd make it work. I knew I'd be buried in law books while Jennifer jetted off to auditions across the country. It's worth mentioning that I graduated a year ahead of her, even though she was 2 years older and had stayed a grade below me. I never quite figured out why this odd situation happened, and whenever I asked, she'd get defensive. Looking back, if I'd known the real reason, we might have called it quits right then and there. Trust me, you'll understand why later on. After high school, I headed off to an out-of-state law school, and that's when we entered the world of long-distance relationships. I know what you're thinking, bad idea, but I was determined to make it work. We talked every night, and I visited her during holidays and special occasions. Sure, there were times when she couldn't chat for various reasons, but I didn't read too much into it. Then came the bombshell. After her high school graduation, she wanted to study acting in Europe. Long distance within the same country was one thing, but an entire ocean between us? I couldn't help but worry. But she reassured me, promising countless phone calls and nightly chats. Time flew by, with her in Europe pursuing her acting dreams while I was back home buried in law textbooks. I met plenty of interesting people, including some women, but I kept things strictly platonic. After all, I had law school exams to ace and a bar exam to prepare for. A few years later, I graduated from law school, passed the bar exam, and secured a job at a mid-sized law firm handling corporate contracts. Not the most exciting gig, but it paid the bills. Meanwhile, Jennifer returned to the States, auditioning for roles left and right, though success remained elusive. Eventually, we made it official and tied the knot. Even though we'd been together for years, I steadily climbed the ranks at the law firm while she landed a few minor acting gigs. We swapped our tiny apartment for a house in Virginia. It was pricey, but with my stable job and good credit, we managed to secure a mortgage. Then, it happened, the CEO of my firm got caught in an embezzlement scandal, and the firm went under. Suddenly, my job vanished into thin air. We had accumulated some debt, and if we couldn't make our mortgage payments, we were on the fast track to losing our new home. When I broke the news to Jennifer, we shared a good cry and began brainstorming ways to stay financially afloat. We considered selling our belongings or taking on part-time jobs, maybe even flipping burgers. Sadly, these ideas were like putting a small band-aid on a sinking ship. But desperate times call for desperate measures. Time passed, and my wife gained more and more acting experience. Besides, we'd all heard how TV shows go to great lengths to prevent spoilers, so I didn't probe too much. Plus, her paychecks were sufficient to cover the mortgage. Life seemed back on track, and I was on cloud 9. I almost wished I could have stayed blissfully unaware, living that lie. However, our marriage was already starting to feel like yesterday's leftovers. 6 months went by, and we were living without worries. No more nightmares about losing our home. I even landed a new job at a smaller law firm just 3 months later. They focused more on public advocacy than corporate work, and though the pay was lower, it felt satisfying to assist regular people. Meanwhile, my wife's acting career appeared to be skyrocketing. Her paycheck increased year after year, but she kept her cards close to her chest, revealing little about her work. Gradually, I began to grow suspicious. It didn't seem unreasonable to want some insight into what she was doing, especially when it was funding our mortgage, but I brushed off my concerns, convincing myself I was being paranoid, and chose to let it slide. After all, I had bigger issues to deal with at my new job and some personal growth goals. Speaking of personal development, I adopted a new diet and committed to hitting the gym 3 times a week. My wife, Jennifer, also made an effort. She would dress impeccably and apply makeup before going out. Strangely, we hardly shared intimate moments anymore, let alone when we went on dates, so her dressing up like a star was a bit puzzling. I mean, I understood that the TV industry had high standards, but little did I know about the real performance she was putting on. Looking back, you couldn't make this stuff up. The plot thickened. One day, an anonymous benefactor decided to spill the beans. I walked into my workplace to discover a plain white envelope in my desk drawer, bearing my name with the words "Read right away." Inside were photographs of Jennifer in what looked suspiciously like a strip club, engaged in activities that left me dumbfounded. Initially, I brushed it off as a potential mistake, perhaps a cruel prank that I could laugh about later. The photos weren't entirely clear and could have been confused with someone else. I clung to the hope that it was all a misunderstanding or just a joke. However, no one came forward to clarify the situation, and my concerns intensified. I realized I had to delve deeper into this matter. Having some money saved from previous pro bono work I'd done before landing my current job, I made the decision to hire a private investigator. I didn't have the time or the stomach to lurk around strip clubs or engage in more intrusive activities. Moreover, if my suspicions were baseless, I didn't want to subject my wife to unnecessary distress. The private investigator's services weren't cheap, but he proved diligent in his work. He traced the source of the photos and conducted a thorough investigation. The report arrived on my desk the following day, accompanied by high-resolution images that left no room for doubt. The truth was laid out plainly. My wife, Jennifer, my partner of 9 years, was playing a starring role at a high-end private couples club. My heart sank, and pressure built in my throat. A pulsing sensation spread across my ribcage. The shock of my discovery hit me like a blast of ice-cold water. 9 years of marriage, plans to start a family once our mortgage was paid off, all now hung in the balance. I felt blindsided, betrayed by Jennifer after everything we had experienced and overcome together. I needed answers. That night, I sat in the living room waiting for her return. It took a few hours, well into the dark of night, for her to walk through the door. I noticed her surprise at finding me awake, since I'd typically be sound asleep by the time she got back. In retrospect, I should have recognized this as a red flag, but they do say hindsight is 20/20ths. The damning evidence weighed heavily in my pocket, but I wanted to hear her side of the story first. I asked her directly, "Why were you working at a private couples club?" She seemed taken aback. "Babe, you must be confused. I don't work at any such place. Where's this coming from? What's making you jump to such conclusions?" Despite the rush of anger, I managed to stay composed and pressed her to tell the truth. Jennifer continued to deny everything and looked at me as if I were insane. That's when I presented the pictures. I spread them out, one by one, watching her closely with each glance she took. The color drained from her face, and guilt radiated from her like heat from a furnace. Any lingering doubt I had about the photos disappeared. However, instead of more lies or a defensive outburst, she broke down in tears. She claimed it was all for the mortgage, to save our home. "It was for us," she pleaded. "You must understand that I'm ashamed. Look at what I've become. I had to do this for us, but I couldn't tell you. I had to keep it hidden." But my betrayal radar was beeping louder than ever. I pointed out to her that her fear of disappointing me didn't give her the right to betray me. Her apology felt like a band-aid on a broken bone. She tried to justify that she never meant to hurt me and didn't want me to find out. Seriously, this excuse could never justify what she did. I then questioned her future plans. After all, I'd secured a new job a few months ago, and she could have quit then. We could have managed the mortgage without her nighttime escapades. She appeared at a loss for words, and frankly, I didn't need to hear any more. Suddenly, everything began to click into place, the designer labels hanging on the coat racks, the expensive decor. The realization hit me like a punch in the gut. Jennifer was no longer the humble actress I had once known. She had become a highly paid symbol of sensuality. Around our home, there were signs of her transformation: designer clothes, expensive decor. How could I have been so blind? One last question lingered in the air: did you enjoy it? The money, the fame, all of it. She remained silent, and the silence felt like an endless chasm between us. Finally, she asked, "What do you want me to do? Do you want me to quit?" At that point, I was fighting back tears. How could I trust her after everything? We stood there, silent, like two statues in a crumbling monument to our marriage, both hoping for a miracle. My life felt like a cheesy joke. Then, she broke the silence, pleading for a second chance and vowing to quit the next day. I wish I could have remained cold and kicked her out. I'm sorry to say this, but it's the truth. I should have refused. That would have been the right thing to do, and I came really close to doing it. But I couldn't bring myself to say the word divorce. It felt impossible, given how intertwined our lives had become. Instead, I reluctantly agreed. I decided to give her a second chance. The next day, despite her objections, I went with her to the club to verify that she was truly quitting. There, I watched as my wife confronted her boss. My fists clenched as I observed his smug expression. After this emotionally draining encounter, we left together. I chose to take a week off from work to reconnect with her. We tried to relive our teenage days, reminiscing about sweet nothings, playful pranks, and laughter. It felt nostalgic, and for a brief moment, I genuinely believed we could mend our relationship. It might sound strange, but my wife's former job at the private couples club had actually saved our house. It was a tough pill to swallow, considering I had always been the primary breadwinner. Nevertheless, she had quit right in front of me, and now we had more time to spend together. Another week passed, and she began applying for new jobs. Around the same time, my law firm assigned me to handle a $1 million lawsuit in Indiana. The prospect of going long distance again made me anxious, but my wife's reassurances gave me the courage to accept the job. At the airport, we bid each other a passionate farewell, filled with promises, hugs, and kisses. As I departed, a mix of excitement for my new role and anxiety about trusting Jennifer once more overwhelmed me. So there I was, torn between trying to trust my wife to remain faithful while I was away, or deciding to end our marriage. I chose to trust her, even though some might judge me for it. Yet, just when things were starting to improve, Murphy's Law struck once more. The universe seemed determined to test me further. My weakness had been exposed, showing that I wasn't yet strong enough to face the challenges ahead. And so, my life took another unexpected turn. The initial weeks at my new job showed promise. I was defending with troubled teenagers on the verge of juvenile detention, exactly the fulfilling work I had been searching for. Despite my busy schedule, I made it a point to call my wife every evening. However, after a few weeks, I noticed a change. There were times when she wasn't available or didn't answer my calls. She had her explanations, like job hunting and errands, which I accepted without question. Then, one day at work, I received a mysterious text message. It was from the anonymous person who had first alerted me to Jennifer's secret life. The message stirred up a familiar sense of unease, and my heart began to race once more. I quickly responded and arranged to meet at a local restaurant the following Tuesday. The week leading up to the meeting felt like an eternity, but Tuesday eventually arrived. I finished work by 5 p.m. and drove to the restaurant. I arrived a bit early, ordered the first thing I saw on the menu, and settled into my seat. To be honest, I wasn't interested in the food. My entire focus was on the mysterious guest who was about to disrupt my life again. Around 6 p.m., an elegant woman entered the restaurant. Somehow, I instinctively knew she was the person I had been waiting for. As she approached my table, she introduced herself. "I'm Nancy." You must be Jessica's husband, right? Yes, I replied, my interest piqued. How did you come into possession of those pictures? Nancy let out a heavy sigh before responding. We both worked at the same club, but I quit last week. She paused, scrutinizing me carefully before continuing. I should have spoken up earlier, but I was afraid of losing my job. Now that I've left that terrible place, I think it's time for you to hear the whole story. A whirlwind of emotions overtook me: anxiety, anticipation, doubt. What was I about to discover about my wife? Please continue, I urged, leaning forward with eagerness. Nancy exhaled deeply and began. Jessica and I were colleagues. We shared the same work schedule and often took our breaks together. I had been there for 3 years before she arrived. I helped her settle in, completely unaware that she was concealing her marital status. Whenever I asked her if this job was truly what she wanted, she always answered confidently with yes, and I took her at her word. She paused, as though debating how much to reveal. At first, she would clock out promptly after her shift and head straight home. But over time, I noticed changes. She started spending more time with the customers and the staff. Our club attracted many actors, and Jessica seemed to connect particularly well with them. She also began arriving at work in increasingly extravagant outfits. While that wasn't unusual for the job, Jessica took it to the next level. Nancy continued recounting the events, her voice steady, but there was an edge to her words. One night, Jessica invited me to a nightclub after our shift. We both ended up quite intoxicated, though I drank less since I had to work the next morning. I took responsibility for Jessica's condition that night. She trailed off, and I could feel the weight of her words sinking in. Nancy booked an Uber to ensure she got home safely. On their way back, Jessica asked why Nancy worked at the club. Nancy shared the honest truth: the pressing need for money and her unsuccessful attempts to find employment elsewhere. When Nancy posed the same question to Jessica, she initially claimed it was to cover her mortgage. However, she later confessed that she continued working there because she enjoyed the luxurious lifestyle the job provided. Then, Nancy dropped the colossal bombshell that surpassed all the revelations before. In her intoxicated state, Jessica had slipped up and mentioned that I sounded like her husband. I was horrified. Nancy surmised that I must have been unaware, so she took those covert photos to alert me. She explained, I identified your workplace, placed the envelope in your cubicle, and hoped for the best. I was left in shock, replaying the night I confronted my wife. You started for us, but continued for yourself, I accused her. My gut instincts had been correct all along, and I regretted not trusting them sooner. I regretted being weak and gullible throughout this ordeal. Noticing my silence, Nancy patiently waited for my response. I expressed my gratitude for her candor and disclosed my decision to initiate divorce proceedings. With that, Nancy exited the restaurant and, by extension, my life. Yet, something still felt unsettling. As I prepared to file for divorce, a startling letter arrived, adding yet another blow. The hits just kept coming. Jessica had beaten me to the punch, leveling allegations of misuse, mistreatment, and even infidelity against me. The outlandish claims were accompanied by a photo of Nancy and me at the restaurant. It suddenly dawned on me: Jessica had been monitoring my activities. Despite being overwhelmed by anger and anxiety, I recognized the need to maintain composure. Even though the damning evidence was mounting and my wife was publicly defaming me on social media, I knew these accusations were unfounded. My first step was to rehire the private investigator, armed with a wealth of evidence against my deceptive wife. I was prepared to defend myself, and though Jessica had initiated the first strike, I was resolute in my determination to make her regret this day. I gathered all the information obtained by the private investigator and created backups on my phone and computer. Next, I reached out to Nancy, asking if she would be willing to testify on my behalf during the divorce hearing. My wife had taken a screenshot of our conversation and was accusing me of infidelity and more. Nancy's response came after a full day: "Yes, just let me know when." I replied, informing her that the hearing was scheduled for the following month. That night, I meticulously organized all the evidence and mentally prepared myself for the ultimate showdown, to put an end to my wife's duplicitous games. Fast forward 1 month, the day of the divorce hearing finally arrived. I picked up Nancy, and together we drove to the courthouse in Virginia. I had her take an early seat in the courtroom, intending to keep my wife unaware of Nancy's presence until the moment was right. Her turn to testify came, and I knew I had every right to surprise my wife with the unvarnished truth, just as she had ambushed me with her lies. After all, if she could accuse me of infidelity and deceit, I felt justified in exposing her actions to the court. I had also met with my attorney, who arrived 15 minutes after Nancy and me. My wife made her grand entrance 45 minutes later, accompanied by her extended family, a well-dressed man who I assumed was her attorney, and a young girl who bore a striking resemblance to her. A few minutes later, the judge entered, and the hearing commenced. My wife's attorney's opening statement left me in shock. He accused me of the very infidelity I had accused my wife of, claiming that I had forced her to resign from her job, refused to help her find new employment, and falsely accused her when I secured a better-paying job. To make matters worse, he argued that I intended to deny her alimony, leaving her destitute. The most startling allegation followed soon after, one I couldn't have concocted, even in my wildest dreams. Allegedly, I was neglecting to provide support for our supposed daughter, who required financial assistance. He asked the court to compel me to make alimony payments to my wife after the divorce. I was utterly flabbergasted. My wife had never mentioned having a daughter, and her family had kept quiet about it as well. We hadn't even planned on having children, let alone an 11 or 12-year-old girl. As I tried to wrap my head around these revelations, I recalled a peculiar reaction my wife had had to a question in high school. It then struck me, she must have dropped out to conceal a pregnancy. All these years, I believed we had no secrets, yet she had concealed this colossal one right in front of me. I didn't have time to dwell on this shocking revelation, though. The divorce hearing was already in progress, and I had to face it head-on. As much as the truth stung, I couldn't afford to be sentimental or weak anymore. I had to fight for my life at this moment. When it was our turn to present, the battle began. My attorney cleared his throat before addressing the judge. "Your Honor, they've misrepresented my client at every turn. There isn't a single instance of infidelity on his part that can be substantiated. The photographs and questions presented lack sufficient evidence to support such a claim. Moreover, we possess solid evidence that it's the opposing party who has been involved in rampant infidelity. Please refer to Exhibits A, B, and C, which show the opposing party openly admitting to deceptive conduct for financial gain. These actions do not reflect the character of a trustworthy individual, especially one who distorts our actions and those of my client. Additionally," he continued, "we contest the assertion that the opposing party requires financial support, as Exhibit D demonstrates she is currently employed and earning a substantial income." I sat back, watching my wife's attorney's face fall as my attorney presented the truth. The momentum had shifted in my favor, but the battle was far from over. Felt like a victory, albeit one I had never hoped for, much less imagined. As I walked out of that courtroom, I couldn't help but smile, a smile that was part relief, part triumph. It was a weight lifted from my shoulders. The bitter truth was finally out in the open, and I was free of the deception, the betrayal, and the lies that had clouded my life for so long. Jennifer's face, buried in her hands, her family's disappointed gazes, the quiet in the courtroom, it all felt like poetic justice. She had thought she could manipulate her way out of consequences, but in the end, it was me who had fought back. It was a long, painful journey, and I'd stumbled along the way, but the court had seen through her web of deceit. There were no more games, no more pretenses. The hardest part of all was knowing that, despite everything, there had been moments in our marriage when I had genuinely believed in the possibility of a future together. But the woman I had married, the woman who once promised to stand by me, had been living a lie. And it wasn't until I was forced to confront the truth that I realized how deep that lie ran. The next few weeks were filled with paperwork and logistical concerns, canceling joint accounts, selling the house, dividing up assets, but through it all, a strange sense of clarity emerged. I wasn't angry anymore, I was just done. Ready to move on. Ready to rebuild my life, free from the shadow of someone who had never truly respected me or our marriage. And while the bitterness of the past would always linger, the future felt like a new beginning. I still had a long road ahead to heal, to regain trust in myself and in others. But for the first time in years, I could look forward to life with an open heart, without the constant worry, without the weight of betrayal. I never spoke to Jennifer again. After all that had transpired, there was no need for further communication. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. What was left now was the next chapter, one that was entirely mine to write. He was my savior, pulling me out from beneath an avalanche of lies and deception, protecting far more than just my finances. If there were a Nobel Prize for uncovering the truth and rescuing unsuspecting husbands, he would undoubtedly be the winner. This one is dedicated to him.